Goed, de volgende spreker, Gerry McGovern, hoeft eigenlijk nauwelijks enige toelichting. Ik heb Gerry een aantal jaren geleden ook hier op dezelfde locatie gezien over met name de toptakenstructuur. Gerry is de expert wereldwijd op gebied van de toptakenmanagement. Auteur van het boek The Stranger's Long Neck, wat daar dieper op ingaat. En hij werkt voor grote organisaties. Sorry? Ja, lettertype is groot genoeg, hè? Ja. Gerry heeft gewerkt voor grote organisaties, voor Google, Microsoft, IBM en zo kan het nog wel een tijdje doorgaan. Gerry, I give you the floor.
Okay. Thank you. Good morning. So I saw a survey there a while ago, and it said that search engines are now the most trusted media source. But do we really trust search engines? I mean, do you trust Google? And you probably don't trust Facebook all that much either. So what is happening? I think in society in general, we are much less trusting. There's in fact been a collapse in trust in most Western societies. Anyway, we less and less trust the establishment, and we less and less trust brands. So we don't really trust search engines, and we don't really trust Facebook. We use them, and we've moved away from our sense of trusting things to using things, that our trust is based on use rather than on branding or on somebody telling us to do something. So we use the thing as long as it's useful, and that doesn't mean that we trust it. So we're into a much more unstable world. Digital has a kind of initiated a much more fluid, much more unstable environment in which we live. There isn't this long-term trust that we're going to keep using that Ford car, you know, regardless of whether it gets worse or better because our parents bought a Ford, etc. That sort of society is generally over. And we only trust the things that we find that are useful. And as soon as they stop being useful, we stop trusting or using them. So movement in consumption has moved towards use. So in that world, we should measure use. And I think that's the big shift in digital excellence or the digital focus, where pre-digital, most organizations, they didn't really measure use all that much. They measured creation of the things that they made. They had a lot of internal metrics, whereas they measured the inputs. They measured projects, creation of content, creation of websites, creation of things. But in the organizations that pursue digital excellence, they measure use, they measure the consumption of the environment, because they realize that the consumer has moved much more towards judging things based on their use. 20 or 30 years ago, if you came across complex things, whether they were in insurance statements or otherwise, many people would have said to themselves, oh, I'm not that intelligent. I must be stupid. I don't really understand this. I need to trust the expert. I need to trust this organization. But today, people look at complexity and they think in many ways the opposite. They think, you must be stupid. You, the organization. Why have you created this really complex thing? Why isn't it simple? There's a shift of feeling towards confidence in ourselves and confidence in our peer groups. Digital has enabled much greater confidence and power among customers and consumers than it has among organizations. If you look back even, again, 30 or 40 years ago, organizations had all the cool tools. If you worked for a large organization, that was a great thing, and you would teleconferencing, etc. Today, it's the consumers who've all the cool tools. Organizations have seriously fallen behind in their ability to organize. Customers are much more organized today than they have ever been. And in many ways, they are better organized than organizations are. So there's a shift in power. And customers demand things that are useful and things that are simple. So organizations need to shift their model of how do they judge they are being successful as an organization towards measuring the consumption of what they create rather than the production of what they actually create. So that's where I think digital excellence is going. Complexity creates distrust. So if it's not easy, we already have a lot of distrust out there. But certainly, people make a very quick judgment now, often within 4 or 5 seconds, sometimes less than 10 seconds. If this is complex, I don't trust it, I won't use it, I'll move on. Then, of course, the debate, Jonathan was talking about Brexit and everything like that. And this is, we know what happens when trust collapses. Like 8% of people in the United States trust politicians, 8%. And as a result, we get Donald Trump. We know what happens when trust collapses. More people trust second-hand car salespeople in the US than trust politicians. And we see the consequences of that collapse in trust. And we see how trust is collapsing within the European Union. But within the UK, it has collapsed much faster and much quicker. And we see the consequence of that collapse in trust. And there was a survey done a couple of years ago asking UK citizens, what is it you really don't like about the European Union? And 37% of them said that it was loss of national power was what they really didn't like. But it wasn't the number one issue. The number one issue to UK citizens was bureaucracy at 46% of responses. So bureaucracy was a bigger issue to them than loss of national power. And bureaucracy is just another name for complexity. Yeah, and of course there is good bureaucracy, but most bureaucracy that we understand in common phraseology is complexity. It's difficult to deal with. And of course governments are notorious for bureaucracy. Governments take two things from us. They take our money and they take our time. And we don't want them to take either of those things. So you may not be able to control if you're working in a government entity. You may not be able to control how much money is being taken from citizens. But you certainly have an ability to control how much time is being taken from your citizens. So one of the key metrics in digital is manage the customer's time in how long it is taking them to interact, regardless of what type of customer that is, whether it's an ordinary customer or whatever type of customer it is. So managing time. I said the shift towards the customer is becoming more and more powerful. Individuals, consumers are becoming more and more powerful, and organizations are becoming more and more under stress. If you went back to about 2000, typically if people were asked, who do you trust, where do you look for advice and guidance? About 70% of people would have said, we look to experts, we look to organizations, we look to brands. And only about 30% or 20% would have said, we look to people like ourselves, our peers, or myself. And that has basically totally shifted in 15 years. Towards today, about 70% of people look to their peers and to people like them. And there's been a collapse in looking towards the establishment or the brand in the entity. So there's a real shift in societies away from establishments towards individuals and consumer groups or communities, etc. If you go back 30 or 40 years and you say, where did value lie? Well, most value lay in physical assets. So an organization was judged on the size of its plant or its factories or what it physically owned. So back around 1975, most of organizational value. But if we look today, the value has shifted towards intangible assets. So for example, Google's stock price, how much of that is made up by the physical things that Google owns, by its offices, by the amount of land. That's about 4%, maybe 5%. The vast majority of modern value resides in intangible assets. And what are intangible assets? The brand is an example, but most branding is bullshit. In the modern world, most branding is lies. It's a kind of trying to tell you pretending what we are in an environment. So where is value? Well, there was a lot of value in branding and brand value, but that's beginning to shift as well. The value today is increasingly moving towards the customer. Not the potential customer, but your actual customer. So the new model of measurement is measuring on your current customer is your core value base in a modern organization. And if you don't meet the needs of those core customers, you will lose them. And simplicity and ease of use and managing their time and making it easy for them are core ways that we can keep our customers. So it's another reason as well why we need to measure the experience of the customer, not just talk about. I heard a digital officer from a huge organization talk there last week and saying how much we care about the customer, blah, 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 more bullshit. Right? And I asked, do you ever actually observe your customers? They never have observed their customers. And yet she spent a half an hour talking about how the customer experience we're going to give them. And they never test and they never measure the experience of their customers. There's a delusional world out there that we just hire somebody to talk about how much we care. Nobody gives a damn about you talking about how much you care. They will judge you based on use. They won't judge you based on what you say you're going to do for them. Today, people want you, show me. Right, I'll judge you. You tell me it's simple, forget about it. I'll be the one that will decide if it's simple or not. So if the customer is more and more confident and more deciding, it's essential that we know what the experience is actually like for the customer. So we need to measure that experience. So they asked a bunch of companies there a couple of years ago, do you feel you deliver a superior customer experience? And 80% of them said that they did. And then they went out and they asked their customers of those companies, do you feel these companies are delivering a superior customer experience? And 8% of the customers. There's massive delusion among most organizations. Most organizations today are delusional. They think they are doing so much better job than the customers actually think they are doing. So there's a massive delusional gap in most organizations. Another study looked at the seamless customer experience. Right, only 5% of organizations were able to deliver a seamless customer experience where you can move from your tablet to your phone to your desktop and it's all one experience. You cannot have a seamless customer experience if you don't have a seamless organization. If you've got a siloed-based organization, you cannot create a seamless customer experience. So there's a huge pressure coming now today from the customer, demanding, becoming more and more impatient of what they're expecting. Nobody believes anything anymore. You're as likely to get hit by lightning as to click on a banner ad. Right? Marketing and advertising and traditional communication are less and less effective. We just don't trust. We just ignore. We go to the use of the thing, and if it's not easy to use, we leave as quickly as we can. A lot of organizations, because they measure the old model, they measure production. So you're rewarded based on what you produce. So generally, most websites are full of crap. Right? Most websites are 90% crap, and the 90% crap kills the 10% quality. This was Columbia College, and I could give you 100, 200 more examples. They had 36,000 pages. They deleted 97% of them. They went down to 944, 97% reduction. And that resulted in an 82% increase in inquiries of new students. So they got rid of 97% of their website, and they increased by 82% inquiries coming from people wanting to enroll in the actual university. Last year, I was over with the US Department of Health, and they were saying they've 200,000 pages. They deleted 150,000 pages, and nobody noticed. Nobody noticed. Why do we create all this massive quantities of crap? Like, organizations have a fabulous capacity to create stuff that nobody is interested in. Yeah, because it's all these internal egos and fiefdoms, and I produce, therefore I am important. We measure production. We don't measure consumption. We measure the wrong things. If we want digital excellence, we must measure use, not production within the environment. There's the World Health Organization there around the time of the Ebola virus. This was a critical page. Not just citizens or patients, but doctors and health people went to this page. It was a critically important page. Yet they had no time to update it. Right? This is the opposite of digital excellence. They knew this page was critical. Millions of people were visiting this page. They had no time to update it. Why had they no time to update it? Because all the egos inside the World Health Organization were saying, I need to publish on Ebola. I need to publish on Ebola. I need to show what I'm doing on Ebola. And the critical page that people needed was not being updated, even though they had 40 people in their web team. Right, because all the egos inside were so keen to publish what they were doing, what they had done, how they had launched this, how they were making a speech about, etc., etc. Organizations are discrediting and killing themselves in their credibility, one after another around the world. The customer has moved on. Most organizations are back in the Stone Age when it comes to digital excellence. The customer is digital. Organizations are analog at best, most around the world. This was their search results. Latest Ebola death figures. None of them are. This was in October, that 31st of October. First result is from 2nd of April. Next result is from the 1st of April. 22nd of April. Because nobody manages use. Nobody manages people finding critical things in the vast majority of organizations. This is another example of not measuring use. And classically, the old model who says, well, you're just going to have to live with this because we're the only source. We're the center. You're going to have to ring us or you're going to have to write to us. But you go and you search in Google, you get the death figures on the page. You don't get the search results. You get the death figures on the page. More and more organizations are going to become redundant in the digital age because they're not actually delivering value. In fact, many government entities would be better off with open data and closing their websites and just allowing other people properly manage the content and deliver it. Dublin weather. Well, you might say, why would you be interested in that? It's always raining. It's always the same type of weather. But let's move beyond the fact. We're very optimistic in Ireland. We always think my two favorite days in Ireland are St. Patrick's Day and summer. So we get at least one sunny day every year. So we're always watching out for that sunny day. But five years ago, if you were looking for that and you'd say, oh, the good first search result. Our expectations are constantly changing in relation to what is the best experience. So 5 years ago, this was a good experience. Hopefully, the first result is a good first result. You click on it, etc. Right. 2 years ago, this is what a good experience has become. Because you know what? Nobody wakes up in the morning saying, I'm really looking forward to a bunch of search results. Nobody is excited to search, etc. So 2 years ago, this was a good search result. But today, you just go WE and it says 16 degrees. So the sense of the expectation of what is best practice is constantly changing. You know what? We don't like searching. We want to find we'd even prefer if Siri or something says, Gerry, I know what you're thinking, it's 16 degrees. Right? You know, that they'd even guess we want the answer faster and faster and faster. So what was acceptable 5 years ago as best practice is not today. Digital is a constantly moving environment in relation to the expectation of the customer. Part of the essence of getting to this understanding and focus on the customers to truly know what they want. And often there's an opposition in relation to what the organization wants and what the customer wants. Well, if we don't give the customer what they want today, they leave. They'll avoid us. They'll do everything they can do to go someplace else. I spend a lot of time traveling. I've used this many years ago, these slides, and had to bring them back again because in some organizations there's been a loss of focus. But I was at an airport, I think it was in Copenhagen, and I was going down the escalator. I was getting the train into the cities, and there was 3 signs at the bottom of the escalator. Now, they're not the tree that grows in the ground because the Irish can't pronounce our THs, so it was the number 3. There were 3 signs at the bottom of the escalator. So I was coming down to the escalator, and the 3 signs told me they were trains, tickets, and toilets. And we read on the web like we're coming down an escalator, or we are moving down a motorway. And we're looking for we've got those crucial things that we want to do and focus on. And our core job is really identifying what are the trains, tickets, and toilets of our environment first. It's not that the other stuff is not important, but it's critical that if there's 15 signs at the bottom of that escalator, people are just going to keep moving. And if we don't figure out the trains, tickets, and toilets, they won't come back for anything else either. What are the crucial components of what the customer wants from us? And we make sure that we deliver those with the highest degree of excellence. Core to success is empathy, is really understanding the customer, spending time with them, focus on their needs, trying to figure out what are they trying to do, is it getting better, etc. If you're that type of person in most organizations today, that critical person that is actually helping establish digital excellence in a modern organization, if you're empathetic and you're focused on the customer, here's how you're seen within the organization. Right? You're seen as a troublemaker. You're seen as not management material. You're seen as you will not progress within the organization. Most organizations today do not like people who are customer champions. They might go out and do the branding and the marketing bullshit about how they love their customers. But truly, they just want their customers to shut up and accept their products or services and do what they need to do. And most customer champions are actually seen as annoying and irritating because they're always going back and saying, can you simplify this? Can you rewrite this? Can you change this? This isn't working. How do we change the culture in organizations that they actually champion the customer champion, that the customer champion is seen as a key figure within organizations? These are the big challenges that we face. Transform the culture of the organization away from the organization-centric view of the world to the customer-centric. I've been in, I'd say, at least 40 countries giving these type of talks. And I've never had anybody anywhere ever come to me, whether in Taiwan or in Auckland or in Reykjavik. Nobody's ever said to me, can you come in and help us become more organization-centric? You know, we're not focused enough on ourselves. We focus too much on the customer. You know, we're always thinking about the customer, and we forget about ourselves. You know, this is a global issue. It's not a Dutch issue, not an Irish issue. People are tribal everywhere. Organization-centric is the old tribal culture. It's the base of look after the group. And the customer is the stranger. Problem is today, this stranger is a very powerful figure in modern society. And if we don't deal with them effectively and meet their needs effectively, they move on, or they lose confidence in us, or they will stop using us if at all possible. So we as designers or people creating these environments, we do walk a tightrope between basically ego and empathy. The ego of the organization is the number one stoppage in digital excellence and moving towards a customer-centric world. It's not about the technology, it's the ego. Most people, most organizations, they don't want to test, they don't want to focus. It's not an issue of budget. It's not an issue of time, it's an issue of ego. They don't like the idea of the customer having a significant say, or the citizen having a significant say in the design. Designers are full of ego and arrogance, and they want to create their own perfect world, and then for the people to say, oh, isn't this beautiful? Isn't this wonderful? You're so clever, you're so amazing. And the idea of having to co-design with the customer is very irritating and annoying. But whether it's irritating or annoying, it's the future. And it's where we all need to get to. And unfortunately, there are no shortcuts. On the road to success, there are no shortcuts. There are no quick fixes for this. This is a cultural issue. And the best way we can gradually begin to change the culture is for us to constantly bring the experience of the customer into the organization. Show, hey, look, they can't do it. Look, we made a change, it's getting better. We got to constantly immerse the organization in the experience of the customer. The quick fixes don't work. So on the road, there's no shortcuts, and it says, see there, our most valuable resource sits 63 feet ahead. Well, if that's the most valuable resource in most organizations, then we're definitely in some trouble. But the valuable resource, the customer champions who are focused on the experience of the customer, are the future of digital excellence. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for a great presentation, Gerry. Any questions from the audience? Sorry.
Yes, hi. About your example from Columbia College, you measure a 97% decrease in pages, and I don't know the percentages, but an increase in inquiries. How do you know that's not the result of something else? Maybe the glorious marketing department or economic developments?
Yeah. The level of inquiries, application inquiries, had remained stable over the previous 3 years before they had done that initiative. So you can never be absolutely certain, but they had gone a stable level of inquiries for X number of years, and then when they reduced the content, they went up by an 82% increase. But I've got about 200 other examples of the same process, from Telenor or Microsoft or Cisco or multiple other environments. It's not that too much content is always the problem. Sometimes we don't have enough content. But most organizations love to publish because just like the World Health Organization, it's all about the ego of the organization. And they produce all these quantities of content that's not for the customer, but is actually for the ego of the organization. And is like, every 3 or 4 years, they clean up the website, as I was saying this morning, or they go through redesign. Redesign is rehab. I hear, luckily enough, finally most Dutch companies are coming out of the rehab process where you go through, you change your website every 3 years and you do some nice graphics. That is such a terrible strategy, and you all know it's a terrible strategy. Instead, we're into the continuous improvement world. So I have about 200 more examples of Colombia where when you get rid of about 90% of your content because it was never created to be useful in the first place, this content. It was marketing or PR or blah-de-blah-de-blah type of content.
Gerry, that's interesting, because what do you think of the hype of content marketing at this moment then?
It's bullshit as well.
Yeah?
It's all...
It's bullshit.
It's all
that's one for the Twitter, huh?
It's all short-term bullshit.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's all short-term bullshit.
Okay.
It's all... Marketing is so discredited. You know, we test with thousands of people. As soon as they see marketing, it's like, my God, how do I get out of here? You know, how do I get away from marketing? Only works for companies like Coca-Cola, where the more you find out about the product, the less you're like to buy it. So, you know, traditional marketing is becoming more and more discredited, and content marketing is just a junk creation process.
Thank you. Other questions? There, behind.
Is it not also for the companies that they are not listening to the customers because they're afraid they are going to complain, because people are more tend to complain than to be positive about something? And how can you deal with that if it's happening?
Well, you won't deal with that. Let's say that's true. You certainly won't deal with that by ignoring them. How do you make a complaining customer really pissed off? You ignore them. You know, that if you really want to piss off a customer that's complaining, ignore them. You know, oftentimes there's a lot that if you actually, somebody who complains and you actually solve their problem, they can even become a champion of you going into the future. You know, so ignoring people is not a great recipe for if they've got a problem. And actually, in many environments, customers are not negative. You know, they have useful suggestions. So it's not about, you know, the organizations just don't want their customers to have a say. Right? When you cut it all down, when you really get to the base, you've got an egotistical management that doesn't want either the employees, let alone the customers, to have a say in the decision-making process. And that model doesn't work today. We are moving into a much flatter, collaborative world. And actually, Holland is an example of, you know, that sort of society. You are much more likely to achieve digital excellence before other countries because you've got a culture which is much more collaborative than the hierarchy. You see where the internet is much further behind is in societies that are really hierarchical and based on figurehead type of leadership environments. And you see all the progressive countries in Scandinavia are where the web works best. Digital works best in a highly collaborative, iterative, constantly improving type of environment, where the decision is only the decision for now until the environment changes and you evolve rapidly. And you deal with the customer complaint. And, you know, because either they're going to go away and go to a competitor, they're not just going to sit there and say, oh, great brand, I'll still keep buying from you.
Okay, one last question before the coffee break.
About customers with disabilities. I mean, if you listen, as a company, if you listen to your customers, then you listen to maybe the 89% of your customers, whereas customers with disabilities maybe 2%. So how do they get into view of the company?
Yeah, I think that's a good. I think not all, but a lot of the stuff that you do to make it easy makes it easy for everybody. So we dealt with a Norwegian, and there's a win-win for everyone. We dealt with a Norwegian bank, which the login process was horrible. It was horrible for everybody. And it was really hard to find because they had all these huge, big marketing brochures, etc. So they did something radical. They brought the login onto the homepage, and it was the first thing that you saw in the process. So I think that made it better. You didn't have to scroll. It was simple. The input field was there. You didn't have to click. It was so it was simpler for everybody. But the interesting thing was they got a 500% increase in product inquiries by making it easy for their current customers to do what they needed to do. So I think there's a win-win for simplification. Getting rid of all the stuff that you don't need to read helps everybody, right? Whether, disabilities, or if you only have to read 200 words instead of 2,000 words to get the job done, everybody wins. So I don't think it solves every problem, but really focusing on outwards also creates the culture that makes you think about, well, what about everybody? What about we're now focusing outwards. Let's focus even more outwards. So I think there's a win-win for everybody by changing but it's a cultural thing. We have got to move beyond tribes. Customers are not part of the tribe. That's the core problem. Customers are seen as the strangers, the outsiders. And we got to make them part of our ecosystem. And that's a cultural change much more than any other
Nice
issue.
quote just before the coffee break. Thank you again
Thank
for
you.
a great presentation.